I called her mom exactly once and got a fist to my cheekbone, directly under the ceiling camera's lens. I didn't cry that night. I activated the recorder on my key fob, whispering, 9:17 p.m. Thank you for the timestamp. They thought I would stay silent. They didn't know I run compliance and risk for the family corporation. And this upcoming wedding is the stage I have built. My name is Ava Quinn. I am 32 years old, and I stand in the shadows of Glassmere Hall, a cathedral of glass and steel built in the heart of Ravenford, a city that prizes its polished surfaces. Above, the vaulted glass ceiling captures the flat, gray light of the October sky, diffusing it over the 200 guests. The air is thick with the scent of lilies and the sharp, resinous sound of a string quartet tuning. They are tucked into an alcove, their music a tense, vibrating wire stretched over the polite murmur of the crowd. In the center of the room, positioned directly under a focused, warm spotlight, sits the marriage witness table. It's an antique, its dark wood polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the golden light like a pool of still water. This is the stage. This is the altar where the final act of their corporate merger, this marriage, will be signed and sealed. I am not here as a daughter. I am here as an auditor. I stand just behind the lead photographer's lighting rig, using his bulky equipment as a partial blind. My posture is static, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. Tucked deep into my right ear, hidden by the careful sweep of my dark hair, is a custom-molded surveillance earpiece. It's nude-colored, medical-grade silicone, the kind of equipment I authorize for executive protection details or internal investigations. A thin, transparent acoustic tube runs down to a receiver pack clipped to the waistband of my silk skirt. Right now, it broadcasts only the faint, sterile hiss of an open channel. The auxiliary audio feed. Waiting. My pulse is a steady, rhythmic counterpoint to the nervous energy in the room. I am monitoring the secondary channel. Across the room, bathed in the soft glow of the uplighting, is my stepmother, Marla Voss. She is the newly appointed Chief Communications Officer of Voss Terra, the family corporation. Today, she is the mother of the bride. She is adjusting the lace veil on her own daughter. Ellie, Marla's movements are not gentle. They are precise, efficient, like a press officer adjusting a microphone on a podium. She smooths the fabric, her head tilted, assessing the visual, the optic, of the moment. Her dress is a severe, elegant column of silver gray. Her blonde hair pulled back in a chignon so tight it seems to pull the skin at her temples. Her smile is a masterpiece of corporate reassurance, a perfectly calibrated instrument she deploys with strategic precision. Her eyes, however, are not on her daughter. They are scanning the room, checking the lighting, the guest reactions, the placement of the cameras. She is not a mother, she is a director managing her set. A few feet away, my father, Graham, raises a champagne flute. He is the CEO, and today he is performing the role of proud father of the bride. He smiles, the expression landing perfectly, the one he uses for the cover of the annual report. To new beginnings, he says, his voice practiced and smooth, projecting just enough warmth to be believable to the front rows. To family, and to the bonds that make us stronger. I watch him through the crowd. He is a man who has built an empire on willful ignorance, on the strategic decision to not get involved in the messy details, leaving the internal matters to others. He catches my eye for a fleeting, uncomfortable second. I hold his gaze. I feel nothing but the cold, hard clarity of my objective. He looks away first, finding a key shareholder to smile at. The bonds that make us stronger. I almost laugh. My gaze drifts back to the witness table, the island of light in the center of it all. The spotlight is unforgiving. It illuminates the heavy cream-colored pages of the marriage certificate, the ornate silver pen set, and something else, a small, vibrant smudge on the polished wood, right next to where the bride's hand will rest. It's a trace of crimson, a waxy, bright comma of color. I recognize it instantly. terracotta red. Number 14. A high-end, long-wear brand. It's the exact shade I saw smeared on the third knuckle of Marla's right hand the night she hit me, the night she taught me the true meaning of family bonds. A phantom ache radiates from my right cheekbone, a muscle memory of the impact. I resist the urge to touch the spot. Instead, my fingers find the object in the pocket of my skirt. It's cool. Dense plastic, a standard-issue Voss Terra vehicle key fob. I rub my thumb over the raised logo, a grounding, physical gesture. The object feels heavy, weighted not by its components but by its contents. Nestled inside, replacing the standard circuitry, is a high-speed micro SD card. On it, 2 digitally signed, forensically preserved audio files. They are named with the cold precision of an evidence log, 9 to 17 p.m. and 9:22 p.m. Wave. These are not just recordings, they are my affidavits. They are the truth, time-stamped and undeniable. The master of ceremonies, a local radio personality with a voice like melted butter, steps to the podium. He taps the microphone. Testing, 1, 2, beautiful. The sound that fills the hall is flawless. It's crisp, full, and perfectly balanced, reaching every corner of the glass room without echo. It should be. I selected the vendor. Silverline Acoustics. They were not the cheapest bid, nor the one the wedding planner initially proposed, but I consulted on the procurement, citing security and event integrity concerns. I reviewed their contract personally, and I inserted technical addendum 4B, buried deep within the liability and indemnity clauses. In the event of a critical announcement or emergency broadcast, the primary audio source, mic line 14, shall be superseded by the pre-designated auxiliary input, AUX3, which shall be granted priority access to the main PA system to ensure clarity and guest safety. I wrote it myself. It was, I argued, a standard risk mitigation clause. Marla, in her haste to control the look of the wedding, had signed off on all technical contracts without reading the addendums. She was focused on the floral budget. My technician is positioned at the main soundboard, tucked away in a service alcove. He's a freelancer I've used for internal penetration tests, a man who values a clean contract and prompt payment far more than he values corporate loyalty. He's wearing the hotel's standard black blazer, invisible. Our eyes meet across the sea of white roses and expectant faces. I give him a single, short nod, a confirmation. He doesn't nod back. He simply taps one finger on the edge of his console, a barely perceptible motion. The small LED on his board, the one labeled AUX3, has just switched from red to amber. The channel is patched. It is live. It is waiting. All it needs is the go signal. One button press will swap the feed. The music swells, and Ellie begins her glide past the front rows. She's a pale imitation of her mother, draped in white lace, her face a mask of nervous excitement. She spots me as she passes, her path bringing her within 2 feet of my shadow. She pauses, her smile tightening, the perfume rolling off her in a cloying wave. "Ava," she hisses, the whisper lost to everyone but me. "I really hope you're not planning to ruin my mother's day." Her eyes are bright with a mean, shallow confidence. She sees me as the irrelevant, difficult stepsister, the compliance nerd from the back office. I don't turn my full body toward her. I simply meet her gaze, my own smile small, precise, and utterly devoid of warmth. My earpiece gives a faint click as the tech adjusts the gain. "I'm just here to make sure everyone hears the truth." "Ellie," I murmur, my voice flat. I watch the word truth land. It makes her falter. A tiny flicker of confusion, or perhaps recognition, in her eyes. She knows, on some level, what her mother is. She just never expected anyone to name it. She blinks, recovers her PR-trained composure, and sweeps past me toward the altar. The quartet leader raises her bow. The first, long, soaring note of the violin cuts through the silence. Pachelbel's canon, the most predictable emotionally manipulative piece in the entire classical repertoire. But I'm not listening to the melody, I am counting the bars. I have timed this entire sequence to the second. I timed it during the rehearsal they didn't invite me to, watching from a service balcony. I know the exact duration of Ellie's walk. I know the 3.5 seconds it takes for the crowd to settle. I know the 2-second pause before the MC begins his opening remarks. The music is not a soundtrack. It is a metronome. It is the clock, ticking down to the moment I have spent months building. The violin note hangs in the air, vibrating against the glass walls, a perfect, crystalline sound. It is the starting gun. My heart, calm and steady, beats in perfect time. Marla didn't enter our lives. She was acquired. She arrived a year after the Voss Terra IPO, when my father's face was on the cover of Forbes, and the stock was volatile. Our previous image had been one of old money stability, but the market demanded something more aggressive, more modern. Marla was that modernization. She was a communications strategist, and our family became her first, most critical campaign. I was 16. I remember our first family media training session. It was held in the formal dining room. The heavy mahogany table covered not with dinnerware, but with briefing binders. Marla, in a razor-sharp pantsuit, taught us the approved narrative. Graham Voss was the visionary, but a humble one. Ellie, her daughter, was the bright, artistic future. I was the quiet, studious one. A footnote. "We are a brand," she had explained, her voice crisp and devoid of sentiment. "Every public appearance is a press conference. Every charity gala is a shareholder meeting. Your answers must be consistent, on message, and brief." She taught us to pivot, to bridge, to deflect. She taught us how to smile as if we were sharing a secret, not hiding one. She taught us the script. In the public sphere, it worked brilliantly. The financial press dubbed her the Voss Terra Whisperer, the woman who healed the company's stodgy patriarchal image. Feature articles were written about her balancing act, the high-powered executive who was also a devoted bonus mom. At home, the balance was less a delicate art and more a military operation. She controlled the dinner schedule with the same ruthless efficiency she used to coordinate a crisis response. Menus were approved a week in advance. Topics of conversation were implicitly vetted. Spontaneity was a liability. Every interaction was a performance review, and she was the sole arbiter of our success. My father, relieved to have the soft side of his life managed so capably, ceded all domestic control. He saw it as excellent delegation. When I graduated from college with a degree in forensic accounting and risk management, I knew I wouldn't be joining the company through the front door. I submitted my resume to the anonymous HR portal, applying for a junior internship in the internal control department. I used my mother's maiden name, Ava Quinn. I was hired based on my GPA and a series of aptitude tests. For my first 6 months, no one in the sprawling Voss Terra headquarters knew who I was. I learned the company from the inside out, not as an heiress, but as an analyst. I learned its vulnerabilities, its procedural gaps, its hidden debts. I learned where the bodies were buried because I was the one auditing the graveyard. Eventually, of course, the connection was made. My department head discovered it during a background check for a higher security clearance. He was terrified. I was promoted. It was a move Marla couldn't block without looking suspicious. But she made her displeasure known in other ways. In the public hallways of the executive floor, she'd wrap an arm around my shoulder, her nails digging slightly into my blazer. "Look at this kiddo," she'd say to a passing VP, "all grown up and keeping us all in line." The condescension was a performance for the audience, a way of framing me as a child playing dress-up. Then, in the silence of a closed-door meeting, she would dismantle my work, a project I had spent months on, a proposal to streamline supplier audits to reduce fraud, would be dismissed with a wave of her hand. "Too disruptive to our current partnerships, Ava," she'd say, her eyes cold. "We need to think about the optics." An hour later, an email would arrive. Entire executive team, announcing the project was indefinitely postponed. She never left fingerprints. She made it seem like a sound business decision, a strategic pivot. My competence was the unspoken casualty. But I was a risk analyst. My job was to identify and document threats, and Marla was the single greatest internal threat the company had. So I began to document her, not with emotion, but with the detached precision of my profession. I logged the meeting times where she publicly praised an employee, followed by the email chains where she shifted blame for a failed initiative onto that same person. I created a timeline of her directives, cross-referencing them with the company's official code of conduct. I noted the patterns, the methodology. She favored pushing blame onto junior staff, particularly women, who were less likely to challenge her authority. She used vague, unrecorded verbal instructions, followed by carefully worded emails that created a false paper trail. She was an artist of plausible deniability. Once, I brought my concerns to my father. I chose my moment carefully. Catching him in his home office after a quarterly earnings call had gone well, I presented him with a carefully compiled report, showing a clear pattern of procedural violations in the communications department, all originating from Marla. I didn't frame it as a personal attack. I framed it as a legal and financial liability. He scanned the first page, his brow furrowed. He didn't look at the data. He looked at me. "Ava," he said, his voice low and tired. "What is this, really?" "It's a compliance issue," I said. "It's a pattern of behavior that exposes the company to litigation and damages our internal culture." "No," he said, closing the binder and pushing it back across the desk toward me. "It's a scene, and we don't make scenes. This family, this company, needs to maintain its image. Marla is essential to that image. Drop it." That was when I understood. He wasn't the CEO of a corporation. He was the chief collaborator in a fiction Marla was writing. His only directive was to protect the narrative. After that, I never brought him a report again, but I didn't stop documenting. The act of recording became a reflex, an extension of my professional duties. If a system is flawed, you collect data until you have an undeniable case for an overhaul. My key fob became my field notebook. A whispered comment in a hallway, a threat veiled as a joke in the executive elevator. I recorded them all, not to be used immediately, but to establish the pattern. I was building a case file on the corrosive culture Marla was creating, data point by data point. While I was building my case file, Ellie was building her brand. She studied public relations at a top university, a disciple of her mother's dark arts. Our family home became a shrine to her achievements. Her framed graduation photos, Ellie laughing with friends, Ellie accepting a diploma, Ellie shaking hands with the dean, lined the walls of the living room. They were glossy, perfectly lit testaments to a life lived for the camera. Meanwhile, the only thing I hung on the wall of my small office at Vos Terra was a massive, laminated flowchart of the ISO 9001 quality management standard. She was the story. I was the footnotes, the legal disclaimer no one reads. She saw me as a gray, uninteresting shadow cast by her own brilliance, a necessary but boring part of the family portrait she was so carefully curating. The first time she hit me, it was after a promise. We were at a charity gala, and I had just successfully navigated a difficult conversation with a journalist who was asking pointed questions about our labor practices overseas. I had used the techniques Marla had taught us all those years ago. Bridge, pivot, deflect. Marla found me by the bar, a flute of champagne in her hand, her smile dazzling. "You see?" she said, leaning in close, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "You're one of us. We're in this together. You and I, like sisters." She was triumphant, eager to claim my success as a result of her tutelage, and in a moment of profound, regrettable weakness, I believed her. I thought, for a second, that perhaps I had been wrong, that this could be a family. Later that evening, as we were leaving, she asked me to fetch her coat. Her tone was casual, but it was an order. As I helped her into it, I said, quietly, "You did a great job tonight, Mom." The word hung in the air between us, alien and wrong. I had never used it before. Her smile vanished. It didn't just fade, it was extinguished, leaving a void. Her eyes went flat and hard. We were standing in a quiet corridor, away from the crowds. She glanced around, then turned back to me. "Don't you ever," she hissed, her voice a razor. "Call me that." And then her hand came up, fast and economical, and her knuckles, hard with rings, connected with my cheekbone. The punch wasn't wild. It was controlled, precise, designed for maximum impact with minimum visibility. My glasses flew off my face. The shock of it was less about the pain and more about the sheer, undeniable data it provided. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a difficult relationship. This was an assault. My carefully constructed model of her behavior had been missing a key variable: physical violence. Now, the model was complete. From that moment on, I stopped calling her Marla. I stopped using her name at all, even in my own head. A name implies a person, a relationship. She was not a person to me anymore. She was a liability, a series of actions and consequences. The truth of who she was, the truth of what she did, became inseparable from the objective evidence I collected. I no longer thought of the time she threatened me or the time she hit me. I thought of 9:17 p.m., wave. I called the truth by its timestamp. The family dinner was staged at Whitlow and Pine, a restaurant whose aesthetic was one of aggressive minimalism. It was all polished concrete, exposed ductwork, and uncomfortable chairs designed to discourage lingering. It was a place for transactions, not connections. We were in the Oak Room, a private space enclosed by glass walls that could be frosted over with the flick of a switch. They were currently semi-opaque, blurring the outside world into indistinct shapes of light and shadow. In the precise center of the ceiling was a single dark hemisphere, a wide-angle security camera. I had noted its model number and field of view the moment we walked in. It was a silent, impartial witness. The pretense for the gathering was to discuss the final seating chart for the wedding. In reality, it was another of Marla's command performances, an opportunity to issue directives under the guise of familial collaboration. The conversation was a sterile exchange of names and allegiances. The Hamiltons can't be seated next to the board members from Starbridge Capital. Their Q2 earnings were a disaster. Put Graham's cousin from Seattle at the back. He's a liability after 2 glasses of wine. I said little, offering only logistical input when asked directly. I was observing, documenting, the way Marla's fork scraped her plate when my father disagreed with her, the way Ellie checked her reflection in the back of her spoon every 30 seconds, the way Graham kept his phone on the table, face up, his attention split between his family and the flickering stock ticker. The moment came, as I knew it would, disguised as an olive branch. A reporter from the Ravenford Business Journal was dining in the main room and had sent over a bottle of champagne with a congratulatory note. Marla was radiant. This was the kind of public validation she craved. She raised her glass. "To family," she said, her eyes sweeping over us, the perfect picture of a matriarch. "And to a seamless, beautiful wedding." My father and Ellie echoed the toast. I raised my glass but remained silent. Marla's gaze landed on me, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. "Ava, aren't you happy for your sister?" "Of course," I said, my voice even. "I was just thinking, this reporter will write a wonderful piece. You've handled the entire media strategy for this wedding perfectly. Mom." The word was a stone dropped into a silent pool. I had used it deliberately. A calculated test of her composure in a semi-public setting. Her smile didn't falter, but it became a rictus. Her knuckles whitened around the stem of her champagne glass. The performance was over. She leaned forward, the motion fluid and serpentine. The air grew thick with the scent of her perfume, a complex, expensive fragrance of bitter orange and wood smoke. It was the scent of power and concealment. Her voice, when it came, was a venomous whisper, meant for me alone, but delivered with the force of a command. "Don't you ever call me that in front of reporters," she hissed, her blue eyes turning to chips of ice. "You are not my daughter." Her hand moved. It was not a slap, but a punch, a compact, efficient transfer of energy from her knuckles to my right cheekbone. It was the same move as before, but this time, it was perfected by practice. My head snapped to the side, my hair flying across my face. The impact was a dull, thudding shockwave that vibrated through my jaw. The table shuddered. The ice cubes in my water glass jumped and clinked against the crystal with a sharp, metallic sound, like a tiny, frantic alarm bell. There was a half-second of ringing silence. I didn't cry out. I didn't even gasp. I slowly turned my head back, my eyes locking on the dark lens of the camera above us. Then, with deliberate calm, I dipped my head slightly, bringing my mouth close to the collar of my jacket, where my key fob was clipped to an inner pocket. I pressed the side button. 9:17 p.m., I whispered, my voice perfectly steady, the words a clean, sterile data entry. Thank you for the timestamp. My father's head shot up from his phone, his face a mask of alarm, not for me, but for the potential breach of decorum. For God's sake, he hissed, his voice a low, furious growl. Do not make a scene. His eyes weren't on my face, or on Marla's. They were darting toward the frosted glass door, terrified that a waiter might choose this exact moment to walk in. Ellie let out a delicate, theatrical sigh. She looked at me, not with concern, but with a profound, dismissive pity. You are just so sensitive, Ava, she murmured, as if I had just complained about the temperature of the room. She then picked up her phone, angled it artfully, and took a picture of her crème brûlée, the blue flame of the caramelized sugar dancing in the darkness. She was already crafting the narrative for her Instagram story, a narrative in which this ugly, violent moment had never happened. The rest of the meal passed in a state of cryogenic silence. When the waiter finally came with the bill, I spoke up before Marla could reach for it. Could I please have an itemized receipt? I asked, my voice clear and professional. The waiter, a young man with nervous eyes, nodded and scurried away. He returned with the detailed printout. Marla snatched it, scrawling her signature across the bottom line. It was an aggressive, angular slash of red ink from the custom pen she always carried. An invoice for services rendered, a signed confession. I watched her do it, my cheek throbbing in a dull, steady rhythm. We left in silence, a dysfunctional procession through the hushed restaurant. In the concrete echo chamber of the underground parking garage, under the flickering fluorescent lights, Marla made her move. As my father and Ellie walked ahead toward their car, she grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my wrist like a vice. The pressure was sharp and immediate. Listen to me, she snarled, her face inches from mine. The scent of orange and smoke was suffocating. You open your mouth about any of this. You so much as whisper a word to anyone, and you lose your job. I will personally see to it that you are blacklisted from every financial firm in this country. Is that clear? This was not a personal threat. This was a corporate action. She was leveraging her executive power as a weapon. The cold night air swirled around us, carrying the smell of exhaust fumes and damp concrete. I didn't try to pull away. I simply met her gaze, letting the camera in my mind record the expression on her face, the pressure on my wrist, the exact wording of her threat. I waited until she released me, her hand leaving angry red marks on my skin. As she turned to walk away, I brought the key fob to my lips again. My thumb found the button. 9:22 p.m., I whispered to the empty, echoing garage. Repeat threat logged. Abuse of corporate authority to coerce silence from a subordinate. We rode up in the elevator together, the four of us, in unbearable silence. The walls were polished chrome, and they reflected a distorted funhouse version of our family. My father, staring at the floor numbers as they lit up. Ellie, checking her makeup on her phone. Marla, staring straight ahead, her jaw set. And me. I watched my own reflection. My right cheek was beginning to swell, a faint, purplish discoloration blooming just below the eye. The bright, clinical light of the elevator car was unforgiving. It wasn't a bruise. It was a seal. It was a stamp of authenticity on a legal document. The pain was irrelevant. The proof was everything. It was a conformed copy of the truth, officially notarized on my own skin. This wedding was not a celebration. It was a system I had designed. Every element, every vendor, every logistical decision was a node in a network I had been building for 6 months. It was a compliance trap, built to the most exacting specifications. It began with the audio. I approached the wedding planner, a frantic woman named Celine, offering my professional services as a favor to the family. "I manage risk for Vos Terra," I told her, my voice calm and reassuring. "An event of this profile, with so many high-level stakeholders, requires certain technical safeguards. I'd be happy to review your vendor contracts, gratis." She was, of course, relieved. The contract for Silverline Acoustics was a simple 2-page document. I returned it to her with a 3-page addendum. "Just some standard liability and technical riders," I explained. Buried in the legalese was Technical Addendum 4B, the clause that gave priority to the auxiliary channel, but there was also Addendum 5.c. Event planner and client, Mrs. Marla Voss, affirmed that all audio and visual materials supplied to the vendor for broadcast during the ceremony, including but not limited to musical recordings and pre-recorded speeches, have been legally cleared for public performance. This indemnified the audio technician. He was just playing a file he was given. And then, the masterstroke. Addendum 6A. All attendees, participants, and speakers within the Glassmere Hall event space consent to audio and video recording for archival, security, and promotional purposes as deemed necessary by the client. The client, the one who signed the contract, Marla. In her haste to secure the vendor, she had signed a blanket release, granting herself permission to record everyone, and in doing so, granting me permission to record her. Next, the visuals. The official wedding photographer and videographer were Marla's choice. Artists who specialized in soft focus, romantic imagery, they were useless to me. I hired my own crew. I filed the paperwork with Glassmere Hall myself, securing a separate vendor permit for a documentary interview team tasked with creating a corporate legacy video as a surprise gift for my father. Their permit gave them access to all areas, and most importantly, a dedicated, isolated audio feed from the main soundboard. They were not there to capture the kiss. They were there to capture the fallout. One of their cameras was a static, wide-angle shot of the front 2 rows, where the board of directors and key shareholders were seated. The other was a rover, whose job was to stay focused, in tight close-up, on Marla's face. The orchestration of the ceremony was a masterclass in social engineering. I provided the MC with the official list of speakers, which he had dutifully loaded into his teleprompter, but I also sent him a separate, encrypted file. "This is a contingency script," I wrote in the email. "Mr. Graham Voss is considering a last-minute surprise addition to his speech. This file is for your reference only in case he signals for it. Please load it onto the backup prompter." The file, of course, contained no speech. It was simply a text file that read, "Stand by for auxiliary audio." It was a misdirection, another layer of plausible deniability for the technical crew. While the wedding preparations were in full swing, the corporate trap was being set. At exactly 10:03 a.m. this morning, a courier delivered a standard inter-office file box to the General Counsel's office at Vos Terra. It was marked, "Confidential, urgent review, no return address." Inside was not a vague complaint, but a meticulously organized binder. It contained copies of the HR disciplinary files for 3 employees. Marla had terminated in the last quarter. All 3 had been managed out for performance issues. My binder included their actual performance reviews, which were stellar, alongside copies of emails, which I had recovered from the server archives, showing Marla's direct order to their managers to build a case for dismissal after they had questioned her department's budget reconciliation, and on the bottom of each falsified severance document, Marla's bold, red ink signature, approving the termination and the accompanying non-disclosure agreement. It was a clear, actionable pattern of retaliatory firing and shareholder fraud. The legal department would be reviewing it right now. Back at Glassmere Hall, the gift table was set with a mountain of tasteful cream-colored boxes. Tucked beside the calligraphed card box, I had placed a sleek silver iPad on a stand. The screen was illuminated, displaying the landing page for the Vos Terra Confidential Reporting Portal, our official, SEC-compliant whistleblower hotline. It was an app I had personally overseen the development of. To the average guest, it looked like a digital guestbook. To the employees and board members present, it was a message, and to make it effortless, I had a stack of small, elegant cards printed. They were identical to the thank you cards for the party favors, but on the back was a simple QR code. The text above it read, "Share your well wishes for the happy couple." The code, of course, linked directly to the portal's anonymous submission form. Marla's event team was, naturally, running a social media campaign. The official hashtag, #VosFamilyLove, was projected in a soft, tasteful script onto one of the walls. It was pathetic. It was also useful. 2 days ago, I had executed a targeted ad buy using my personal credit card. The campaign was geofenced to a 3-block radius around Glassmere Hall and triggered by a specific set of keywords: Vos Family Love, Vos Terra, Graham Voss, Marla Voss Wedding. Anyone in this room who idly searched that hashtag on their phone would be served a discreet, text-based ad at the top of their results. It read, "Concerned about Vos Terra's internal ethics? Read the latest filing on the Vos compliance case. Anonymous reporting is protected." The link led to a neutral-looking blog page I had created, which simply listed the public facts of the retaliatory firings, without naming names, and linked, once again, to the whistleblower portal. My final asset was already in position. He was dressed in a rumpled linen suit, a battered Leica camera in his hand, looking every bit the part of an artsy second shooter photographer. This was David, my senior investigator. He was the best forensic auditor I had, a man who could find fraud in a perfectly balanced spreadsheet. He wasn't taking photos, he was taking notes. His job was to observe and record the immediate, unfiltered reactions of the board members. Who looked at whom? Who left the room? Who pulled out their phone? He was my human event data recorder. At the soundboard, my technician had everything he needed. I had personally loaded the audio files onto a password-protected playback device last night. I had taken the raw and WAV files from my key fob, run them through an audio processor to clean up the background noise and enhance the vocal frequencies, and then resaved them. 9:17 p.m. became Ceremony Vows EA. 9:22 p.m. Wave became Ceremony Vows B. They were just 2 more tracks in the ceremony playlist. Right after the string quartet's processional, all he had to do was press play. Every avenue was secured. Every action was defensible. I hadn't broken a single rule. I had, in fact, enforced them. Marla had used the corporate structure as a shield. I was turning it into a cage. She had signed the contract that allowed her to be recorded. She had signed the papers that proved her fraud. She had provided the audio evidence herself. A free and willing confession. I was merely the administrator, the compliance officer ensuring all documents were properly filed and all evidence was presented to the relevant parties. I stood in the shadow of the photographer's rig, the hiss of the open channel in my earpiece, the violin note hung in the air, a single, sustained point of tension. Everything was in place. All the calculations were complete. All I needed was the cue. All I needed was one single, authorized touch of a button. The string quartet faded, the final note of the canon dissolving into a perfect, expectant silence. The 200 guests, a curated audience of Ravenford's elite and Vos Terra's most critical stakeholders, turned their gazes to the front. The lighting shifted, dimming over the guests and intensifying on the altar, where Ellie and her groom stood, beaming. My father, Graham Voss, stepped up to the ornate lectern. The single microphone was live. His image appeared on 2 large, discrete screens flanking the hall, a feed provided by the official video team. He looked every inch the statesman, the benevolent CEO. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice wrapping the room in a familiar, confident warmth. Today, we are gathered to celebrate a truly wonderful occasion. Today, we celebrate love. We celebrate new beginnings. Today, we celebrate family. His eyes scanned the front row, pausing to smile at the chairman of the board. He was performing, and he was flawless. I was not watching him. I had moved, a silent shadow drifting from behind the photographer's rig to the service alcove where my technician, Leo, was manning the audio console. The small, sound-dampened space smelled of hot electronics and dust. I stood beside him, my presence a silent, final confirmation. My heart was not racing. It was a slow, heavy, measured beat. Thump, 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 a metronome for what was to come. On the console in front of us, the small LED light above the fader labeled AUX3 was a steady, dull green. Leo, without looking at me, pressed a single button. The light switched to amber. Standby. The channel was patched, muted, and waiting for a single command to go live. From his podium, the MC, a man with a plastic smile and a voice like a game show host, raised his hand to Leo. He was cueing the background music for the vows, a soft, instrumental track. He held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. This was the moment. Leo's eyes met mine. He wasn't nervous. He was a professional executing a contract. His gaze simply asked, "Confirm order?" I gave him a single, deliberate nod. He didn't hit play on the music track. Instead, his thumb moved to the AUX3 fader. He unmuted the channel, then he pressed play on the separate, hardwired device. A single beat of absolute electronic silence, a digital inhale. Then, Marla's voice, not her public, melodic CCO voice, but the one I knew. It was a raw, serrated whisper, amplified 1,000 times, erupting from every speaker in the hall. It was as intimate as a secret and as loud as a thunderclap. "Don't you ever call me that in front of reporters. You are not my daughter." The sound was pristine. I had filtered out the restaurant's background music, isolating her frequency. The collective gasp of the crowd was sucked into the vacuum of that single venomous sentence. Then, the secondary sounds. The sharp, percussive thwack of her knuckles connecting with my cheekbone, a sound like a gavel hitting a block of wood. It echoed off the glass ceiling. It was followed by the sharp, frantic clink, clink, clink of the ice cubes jumping in the water glass. And finally, my own voice, calm, cold, and clear. 9:17 p.m. Thank you for the timestamp. The room froze. It was not a figurative freeze. It was a literal, physical cessation of all movement. 200 of the most powerful people in the city, held captive. I watched my father. His face, projected 10 feet high on the screens, went blank with confusion, then slack with dawning, abject horror. His skin turned a waxy, bloodless white. At the altar, Ellie's hands went limp. Her bridal bouquet, a cascade of white orchids and lilies, slipped from her grasp and thudded onto the marble floor with a soft, funereal sound. Marla. I turned my head to find her. She was staring at the speakers, her head tilted, as if trying to process an alien transmission. Her perfectly painted mouth was half open. Before the first whisper could begin, before she could even form a thought, I tapped Leo's shoulder. "Next file." His fingers moved, a 1-second pause, just long in duration to be agonizing, and then, her voice again, this time lower, colder, laced with the unmistakable hiss of the parking garage's ventilation system. "You open your mouth about any of this, and you lose your job. I will personally see to it that you are blacklisted." This, the audience understood. This was not a family squabble. This was a corporate threat. This was an abuse of power. The reaction was no longer silent. It was a wave of sound, a chorus of sharp intakes of breath. A man in the front row, the head of Starbridge Capital, turned and looked directly at my father. His expression was not one of sympathy. It was one of pure, cold fury. Then, the phones, one by one, then in dozens. They came out. The blue light of their screens illuminated the shocked faces of the guests. I saw a junior employee from our own PR team, her hand trembling, her phone aimed at the altar. The hashtag #VossFamilyLove, still projected on the wall, was no longer a PR slogan. It was a target. It was a joke. The digital tide was turning, in real time. I looked at Leo. Cut. He hit the mute button. The silence that rushed back in was brutal. It was louder, heavier, and more terrible than the audio had been. It was a vacuum filled with 200 individual heartbeats, 200 spinning minds processing what they had just heard. My father was gripping the lectern, his knuckles white. He looked like he was going to be sick. The MC, his face slick with sweat, lunged for his own microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he stammered, his voice cracking. We seem to be experiencing a terrible technical difficulty. Please, just..." He was looking at Leo, desperate for an explanation. He was looking at me. I stepped out from the alcove, just enough to be visible to him. I shook my head, my expression one of polite correction. I didn't raise my voice, but in the crushing silence, my words cut through the air. "No," I said, my voice perfectly level. "There's no difficulty. Those are the real vows." The silence in the hall was not an absence of sound. It was a dense, physical presence, a vacuum packed with the shocked inhalation of 200 people. But in the digital sphere, the reaction was already a deafening roar. My personal cell phone, clipped to my skirt band, began to vibrate. It was a continuous, frantic buzz. I had set a monitor on the whistleblower portal, on the gift table, the iPad screen, which had been passively displaying the portal's welcome page, suddenly lit up. A discreet notification banner slid down from the top of the screen. New anonymous report received. Event code, GHM 200. Before it could slide away, another replaced it. New anonymous report received. Event code, GHM 200. Then a third, a fourth. 1, 2, 5, 12. The guests, the shareholders, the junior employees, the vice presidents. They were still sitting in their chairs, their faces pale, but their thumbs were moving. The QR codes I had printed on the thank you cards were being scanned. Years of suppressed grievances, of witnessing Marla's management style, were now being uploaded, time-stamped, and logged, shielded by the chaos of the moment and the legal protection of the app I had built. The dam hadn't just broken, it had been detonated. Simultaneously, miles away, the second part of the trap was springing. I knew the general counsel's weekend routine. I knew his junior paralegal would have been the one to retrieve the anonymous courier box from the mailroom. Right at this moment, she would be calling him, her voice trembling, as she described the contents. The falsified HR files, the severance agreements, the internal emails, the urgent verification, and litigation hold alerts would be firing across the company's servers. Marla's access to her own email, her files, her server permissions, all of it would be frozen, in real time, by a system acting to protect itself. She just didn't know it yet. In the hall, the human system was catching up. The fragile ecosystem of power and pretense was collapsing. I saw my father, Graham, still clutching the lectern as if it were a life raft. His phone, which he had left on the podium, was ringing. He stared at it, his hand shaking, unable to process the action of answering. The caller ID would read, Robert Tenney, the lead independent director of the Voss Terra board, a man who did not tolerate surprises. A moment later, the ringing stopped, replaced by the buzz of a text, and then a calendar invite. I knew what it would say. Emergency board session, 8:00 a.m., my office, attendance mandatory. My father's public mask of the proud father cracked, shattered, and fell away, revealing the terrified, complicit man beneath. I let my eyes travel to the front row. Table 1, Mark Kellerman, the managing director of Starbridge Capital. our largest institutional investor, was methodically placing his linen napkin on the table. He was a shark, a man who smelled blood in the water before the first drop fell. He didn't look at Graham. He didn't look at Marla. He simply stood up, adjusted the cuffs of his suit jacket, and gave me a single, brief, appraising look. It was not angry. It was impressed. Then he turned and walked, not ran, to the exit, his phone already to his ear. He would be placing a block sell order. Effective at the market's open, the company's stock was, as of this moment, in free fall. The on-site PR team, Marla's own employees, were finally reacting. I saw one of them, a young woman with a headset, frantically typing on her laptop. The soft, elegant projection of Voss family love on the wall above the altar flickered, then vanished. A futile gesture. They could kill their own hashtag, but they couldn't stop the targeted ad I had bought. My ad, with its link to the Voss compliance case, was now being served to every single person in this room. Their searches fueled by a frantic need to understand what they had just heard. "You have a story? Tell it now." My own phone, the one in my hand, vibrated. A text message. "Marla." It was all caps. "Are you insane?" I let the message sit for a beat. I took a steadying breath. I typed my reply, my thumbs moving with cool precision. "Just trying to maintain the family image. Marla, as you taught me." I hit send. At the front of the room, the tableau had descended into chaos. Ellie was weeping, a raw, ugly sound that had nothing to do with bridal joy. "Make them stop! Make them stop looking!" she shrieked, pulling at her groom's arm. He stood beside her, his face a mask of frozen horror, a man who had just realized his new family was a liability he couldn't afford. Graham, jolted by his daughter's cries, tried to reclaim control. He fumbled for the microphone, his hand slipping on the metal. "Please," he began, his voice cracking, the polished CEO baritone replaced by a desperate, reedy whine. "Please, everyone, this is a private family matter. All families have their—" He stopped. He couldn't say it. He looked out at the 200 phones pointed at him, 200 lenses recording his humiliation. He choked on the lie, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. "Who is responsible for this?" a sharp voice barked. The venue manager, a man in a crisp tuxedo, was storming toward my technician. "Leo, who authorized that audio feed?" Leo, true to his contract, didn't say a word. He simply pointed one finger at me. I stepped forward from the alcove, into the light. I held a single, folded piece of paper. The manager turned his apoplectic face to me. "Ma'am, this is This is Addendum 6, A of the audio-visual contract," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. I handed him the paper. "It grants the client's representative, that's me, priority access to the auxiliary channel for critical announcements. I believe you'll find it's all in order." He snatched the paper, his eyes scanning the text. This isn't... "And this," I said, pointing to the last page, "is the signature of the client, Marla Voss. She authorized the entire technical framework." The manager's rage sputtered and died, replaced by the dazed look of a bureaucrat who has run into a wall of unassailable paperwork. He was trapped. I turned my gaze back to the front. The string quartet was packing their instruments. The MC had disappeared. The only remaining sound was the sobbing of the bride and the low, intense hum of the crowd. The wedding, as an event, had ceased to exist. David, my investigator, my freelance photographer, was capturing the final, most important shot. He had walked slowly up the aisle and was now aiming his lens, in stark, unforgiving detail, at the witness table, at the pristine, unsigned marriage certificate, the silver pen, untouched in its cradle, and beside it, that small, waxy, crimson smear of terracotta red lipstick, the physical evidence of a broken contract. I had done my job. The systems I had put in place were now fully automated. The fallout would continue to cascade. legally and financially, without any further intervention from me. I turned my back on the wreckage of the wedding. I turned my back on Marla, who was staring at her phone, at my text message, her face a rictus of pure hatred. I turned my back on my father, who had collapsed onto a chair, his head in his hands. I walked out of the hall. My heels made a sharp, clean, solitary sound on the marble floor. I pushed through the heavy oak doors into the long, glass-enclosed corridor. The city of Ravenford was spread out below, indifferent and beautiful. The silence was a relief. I took one deep, clean breath. My phone buzzed in my hand, not a text, an encrypted email. The sender was Catherine Price, the chairwoman of the audit committee, and a woman who feared no one, least of all my father. The message was concise. Ms. Quinn, I am at the Four Seasons. The independent directors are convening an emergency session for 8 a.m. tomorrow. You are formally invited to attend and to present the full and unedited materials referenced in your audio presentation and in the whistleblower reports filed today. A car is waiting for you at the south curb. I closed the email. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass. The stage was cleared. The audit was about to begin. The meeting was called for 8 a.m., not at Voss Terra headquarters, with its glass walls and branded artwork, but in the neutral, suffocating territory of the board's outside council. Latham and stone. The 47th floor conference room was a tomb of dark wood, gray upholstery, and soundproof glass. A long, impossibly polished table dominated the space, its surface reflecting the bright, cold morning sun that poured in through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Ravenford River. The view was spectacular, a panoramic display of a city moving on, oblivious. I was there at 7:45 a.m., setting up my laptop. The independent directors filed in at 7:55 a.m., a phalanx of silent, expensive suits. Catherine Price, the chairwoman of the audit committee, took the head of the table. She was a formidable woman in her late 60s, with iron gray hair and a reputation for dismantling CEOs. Beside her sat Robert Tenney, the board's lead independent director, and the other two members of the committee. They did not greet me. They simply took their seats, opened their leather-bound portfolios, and waited. At 8:01 a.m., the door opened. My father and Marla entered. They looked like survivors of a shipwreck. Graham's face was a puffy gray mask, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. He had not slept. Marla was, incredibly, wearing the same silver-gray dress from the wedding. It was a pathetic act of defiance, but the fabric was creased, and a small, dark stain, wine, perhaps, was visible on the skirt. Her perfect chignon was still intact, but it looked less like a hairstyle and more like a helmet she couldn't remove. They were directed by the firm's counsel to two chairs set opposite the board, a vast, polished no-man's land of mahogany between them. They were not participants. They were exhibits. Catherine Price did not look at them. She looked at her watch. It is 8:03 a.m. This emergency session of the independent directors and the audit committee is now on the record. Ms. Quinn, you have the floor. Present your findings. I stood at the head of the table, by the large presentation screen. I clicked the remote. My voice, when it came, was flat, cold, and steady. This was not a family meeting. This was a findings review. Slide 1. Procedural framework. The screen filled with a PDF of the signed Silverline Acoustics contract. I used my laser pointer. As you can see from the executed agreement, the client, identified here as Mrs. Marla Voss, signed off on all technical addendums, specifically Addendum 6A, which grants blanket consent from all attendees for audio and video recording for archival, security, and promotional purposes. Slide 2. Sequence of events. A simple black-and-white timeline appeared. At 17:17 hours yesterday, following the cue from the MC, the audio file, Ceremony Vows EA, was broadcast over the main PA system, as per the priority clause in Addendum 4B. At 17:18 hours, file Ceremony Vows B was broadcast. At 17:19 hours, the auxiliary feed was cut. Slide 3. Evidence provenance. The slide populated with a grid. On the left, the waveform of the audio file, 9 to 17 p.m., wave. On the right, a grainy but unmistakable still frame from the Whitlow and Pine security camera. The timestamp in the corner read 21:17:03. The image was frozen at the moment of impact. Marla's hand blurred, my head snapping to the side, the ice in the glasses rattling on the table. The audio files presented were captured via a personal recording device during a dinner on September 28th. The contents, including the physical assault and the subsequent verbal threats, have been corroborated by the restaurant's security footage, which was obtained via a formal request from my counsel to the venue's ownership group. The chain of custody for all digital files is documented in Appendix A. A lawyer from the firm, a man I didn't recognize, interrupted, his voice smooth. Ms. Quinn, this is all very thorough, but the board is concerned with your methodology. What was your objective in releasing this information in such a spectacular and spectacularly damaging public forum? I turned to face him fully. I did not look at the board. I did not look at my father. I looked at the lawyer. My objective was to protect this corporation, its employees, and its shareholders from a systemic and escalating pattern of abuse of power. I clicked to the next slide. I had previously attempted to escalate this liability through the standard chain of command, I said, my gaze finally cutting to my father, who flinched as if struck. I was explicitly instructed by the CEO to drop it and protect the image. The liability was deemed acceptable. However, when the behavior escalated from procedural malfeasance to include physical violence and, crucially, the use of corporate authority to threaten an employee's livelihood, as documented in file 9:22 p.m., wave, it became an acute, critical risk. The internal channels were compromised. A public disclosure was the only available mechanism to bypass the executive-level suppression and force the independent oversight mandated by our own corporate bylaws. This is insane! Marla's voice was a raw shriek, tearing through the sterile air. She half rose from her chair. She's lying. It was a private, family argument. It was taken out of context. You can't use that. It's private. I didn't respond. I simply looked at Catherine Price. Catherine's gaze was cold steel. She looked at Marla and said, "Sit down." Marla froze, then slowly, agonizingly, sank back into her chair. I turned back to the screen. The assertion that this was a private matter is false, I stated, my voice dropping back to its measured, analytical tone. It became a corporate matter the moment Mrs. Voss leveraged her executive title to issue a threat. But her pattern of leveraging corporate authority to intimidate personnel is not limited to me. I clicked the remote. Exhibit 12. The screen filled with a single email. It was not dramatic. It was banal, workaday, and utterly damning. It was an email from Marla's CCO account to a human resources VP, regarding an employee in the marketing department who had raised a concern about the Q2 budget reconciliation. The email read, "This discrepancy issue needs to go away. It's brand-damaging noise. Have him sign the attached boilerplate confirmation that his review is complete. If he refuses, I want you to start a performance management file on him immediately. He needs to understand that loyalty to the brand's narrative is non-negotiable. Protect the brand." Attached was the falsified review confirmation, which the employee had eventually signed. A new, heavier silence filled the room. This was not about a family dispute. This was a clear, documented, textbook case of compelling an employee to sign a false statement, a violation of whistleblower protections, and a potential breach of Sarbanes-Oxley. Robert Tenney let out a slow, controlled breath. "My God. Graham, this happened on your watch." My father put his head in his hands. He said nothing. He had abdicated. Catherine Price steepled her fingers. She looked at the other 3 directors. "I believe we have sufficient information to act. I move for an immediate, indefinite suspension of Marla Voss from all duties at Voss Terra and its subsidiaries, Pending the result of a full, independent internal investigation, all digital and physical access is to be revoked, and all signing authority for communications, finance, and human resources is to be rescinded, effective immediately. Seconded, Tenney said, his voice flat. All in favor. 4 hands went up. It was unanimous. It was an execution. Marla made a small, choking sound. Furthermore, Catherine continued, her eyes now locked on my father, given the clear and catastrophic failure of oversight and the undeniable conflict of interest, I move that Mr. Graham Voss be required to recuse himself from the Nominating and Governance Committee and the Compensation Committee, effective immediately, until this investigation is concluded. Catherine, please, Graham whispered, looking up, his face ashen. We can manage this. The time for management is over, Graham, she said, her voice devoid of any pity. The motion is carried. The board's external counsel nodded. The decision was legally binding. Catherine Price then turned her full, undivided attention to me. The animosity in the room receded, replaced by a cold, pragmatic assessment. Ms. Quinn, you have taken an extraordinary and frankly reckless risk. You have also, it appears, been the only person in this company upholding its actual code of conduct. The independent directors are hereby commissioning a full-scale internal investigation, to be led by this firm and a forensic accounting team of our choosing. You will act as the internal coordinator for this investigation. You will be granted full, unrestricted access to all company data, servers, and personnel files. You will report directly to this committee, and only to this committee. Is that clear? Perfectly, I said. My phone, sitting face down on the table, vibrated. I glanced at the screen. It was a push alert from the Wall Street Journal. Voss Terra, Voss, trading, halted pending news. Stock plunges in pre-market after wedding scandal video goes viral. Board calls emergency meeting. The system was working. The contagion was spreading from the personal to the corporate, and now to the market itself. I ignored the alert. I opened a new message, an encrypted one, to my technician, Leo. All files, full audio masters, WAV format, all camera angles from the documentary team, copies of all contracts and addendums. Create 3 fully encrypted, air-gapped hard drives. Deliver one to the forensic archive at HQ. Deliver one to my personal safe deposit box. And deliver the third, by courier, to Catherine Price at this address. Immediately. Confirm receipt. His reply came back in less than 10 seconds. Drives are being cloned. Courier is en route. Done. I silenced my phone and placed it back on the table. Catherine Price looked at my father and Marla, who were sitting frozen, 2 statues in a burning museum. Thank you for your attendance, she said, a brutal, corporate dismissal. You may go. We will be in touch via counsel. I did not watch them leave. I did not watch my father stumble as he rose, or the way Marla looked at me, her eyes promising a war she no longer had the resources to fight. I turned back to the screen, pulling up the executive summary of the 58 whistleblower reports that had been filed since 5:19 p.m. yesterday. And now, I said to the board, let's move on to item 2, the systemic falsification of vendor invoices in the communications budget. The audit was just beginning. It was late afternoon on the day after the wedding that wasn't. The Voss Terra stock had been delisted from pre-market trading. A corporate timeout. The board had been in closed-door sessions since our 8 o'clock a.m. meeting concluded. I was given a temporary office on the executive floor, the one that had belonged to the previous COO, a man Marla had forced into early retirement. It was a glass box, sterile and impersonal, overlooking the chaos of her now leaderless communications department below. At 3:15 p.m., my new board-assigned assistant buzzed me. Ms. Quinn, Marla Voss is here. She requests a private word. Send her to conference room C, I said, and please ensure we are not disturbed. Conference room C was a small, interior room with no windows. It was a forgotten space, used for overflow meetings and little else. The table was a cheap laminate, The chairs were functional, and the air was still and close, smelling faintly of old coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. The only light came from a flat, humming fluorescent panel in the ceiling. It was a room with no power, no prestige. It was perfect. I was waiting when she entered. She closed the door behind her. The click of the latch unnaturally loud in the silence. She looked smaller. The silver-gray dress was a rumpled flag of a defeated nation. Her makeup was gone, her face pale and drawn, and on her left hand, a pale, naked indentation where her engagement ring and wedding band used to be. The absence was more conspicuous than any diamond. She didn't sit. She stood across the small table from me, her hands clasped in front of her. She started, and her voice was not her voice. It was a thin, reedy thing. I wanted to apologize. The word was a foreign object in her mouth. It sounded clumsy, ill-fitting. It was a word she had read in a script, but had never practiced. I said nothing. I simply watched her, my hands resting on the table. An apology was not a deliverable. It was not an actionable item. It was data, and in this case, the data was corrupted. She took my silence as a cue to continue, mistaking it for an opening. What happened? It was a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. Things were said. Things were done. It was a family matter that got out of control. It should never have become public. She was still trying to frame the narrative, even here, in this windowless room at the end of her world. The market is panicking, she went on, a note of her old, strategic self creeping back in. The stock is going to hemorrhage value at the open tomorrow. What we need to do, what Graham and I think is best, is to release a joint statement, a unified front. We can say it was a private family issue, a moment of high stress. We can frame it as a lesson in the pressures modern families face. We can stabilize this. She was offering me a deal, a lie, a return to the status quo of a managed narrative. I slid a single sheet of paper across the laminate table. It stopped directly in front of her. It was a typed document. I had drafted it this morning. She looked down at it, confused. "There will be no joint statement," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the finality of a court order. "That is the statement you will be releasing, unedited." Her eyes scanned the page. I knew the words by heart. An open letter to the employees and shareholders of Voss Terra. I, Marla Voss, issue this public and unequivocal apology for my actions, my behavior, which included physical violence and the use of my corporate position to threaten and intimidate a subordinate, was a flagrant violation of the Voss Terra Code of Conduct and the principles of basic human decency. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a conscious and repeated abuse of power. Effective immediately. I am resigning my position as Chief Communications Officer and will cooperate fully with the independent investigation now underway. She looked up from the paper, her face a mask of disbelief, which quickly curdled into a familiar, venomous rage. "You want to destroy me!" It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, the only truth she could comprehend. "No," I said, and for the first time, I allowed a degree of personal conviction to enter my voice. "The destruction was your deliverable. My objective is to stop the cycle." "Cycle?" she scoffed, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping her lips. "This isn't a cycle. This is you, sticking a knife in your own family." She leaned forward, her hands flat on the table, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He will never forgive you for this, Graham. He will hate you." This was her last weapon, the appeal to a daughter's need for her father's love. It was a weapon that had long since run out of ammunition. I met her gaze without flinching. "He already hates me for what I know," I said. "Now he will have to learn to hate his own silence." That was it. That was the blow she couldn't parry. The truth of his complicity, his quiet, cowardly abdication of every responsibility he had to me, to his company, to himself. I saw the fight go out of her eyes. It was like a switch being flipped, a current being cut, all the artifice, the rage, the strategic maneuvering, it all collapsed, leaving behind a hollowed-out woman in a stained dress. A full minute of silence passed. The only sound was the low, electric hum of the fluorescent light panel above us. The air conditioner clicked on, a soft, mechanical sigh filling the room. I thought of the lipstick smudge on the witness table, a final, fading piece of evidence, the ghost of a signature. She closed her eyes. It was a gesture of complete and final surrender. "Fine," she whispered, the word barely audible. "The letter of resignation. It will be on the General Counsel's desk this afternoon." I nodded once, a transaction completed. Good. I had one final term. She started to turn, to leave, but I held up a hand. "One more thing," I said. "This isn't finished. You resigning is a necessary first step, but the damage you did to the internal culture needs to be addressed. There will be a company-wide town hall meeting." She stared at me, her eyes blank. "It will be a professionally mediated forum for employees to discuss workplace safety and ethical conduct," I continued, "with an independent third-party trauma specialist present. Your last official act as CCO will be to send the all-staff invitation. The board has already approved the expense." This was the part she would never understand. This wasn't just about punishing her. It was about repairing the system she had broken. It was about providing a safe harbor for all the other people she had bullied, threatened, and silenced. She didn't argue. She didn't have the will. She simply gave a short, jerky nod, as if her head were being moved by strings. Then she turned and walked to the door. Her hand rested on the handle for a moment before she pulled it open. She didn't look back. The door clicked shut behind her, and the silence rushed back in. But it was different now. It was clean. I remained seated for a long time, listening to the hum of the light. Then I stood, picked up my copy of Her Future, and walked out. The executive hallway was long, empty, and quiet. It felt like a deep, long exhalation after holding your breath for years. That afternoon, the company was summoned, not by email, but by a single, stark notification pushed to every corporate device. All staff town hall, 4:00 p.m., North Dock Auditorium, mandatory attendance. The North Dock Auditorium was a showcase, a perfectly circular room designed to foster a feeling of collaborative transparency. Tiers of seats descended to a central stage, ensuring no one was more than 50 feet from the speaker. It was a corporate panopticon, and today, for the first time, it would serve its intended purpose. The room was packed. 500 employees sat in a tense, buzzing silence, the air thick with rumor and dread. The independent directors of the board, including Catherine Price, occupied a section of the front tier, their presence a silent, undeniable signal that the old hierarchy had been suspended. My father was already on the stage, standing behind a single, minimalist lectern. He looked a decade older, his face a roadmap of sleeplessness and ruin. Marla was seated in a lone chair set off to the side, a defendant in the dock. She stared at a fixed point on the floor. A woman waiting for a verdict she already knew. At precisely 4 p.m., my father cleared his throat. The sound amplified into a dry crackle that made the entire room flinch. He gripped the sides of the lectern. He was trying to take control, to frame this, to perform his final act as the patriarch. "Thank you all for being here on such short notice," he began, his voice a strained imitation of his usual confident tone. "I know the last 24 hours have been difficult. There has been a great deal of speculation, and I want to be clear. What happened was a deeply personal, private family." I held up my hand. I was standing at the main aisle on the first tier, level with the stage. I didn't say his name. I didn't need to. The entire room turned to me. "Before we talk about family," I said, my voice calm and amplified by the room's perfect acoustics, "I think we should all listen to a short audio segment." My father froze, his mouth half open. He looked at the board, then at me, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. Catherine Price gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. I had been authorized. The massive screen behind the stage, which had been dark, flickered to life. It didn't show the wedding video. It showed a document, the Voss Terra Code of Conduct, Section 4, Retaliation and Coercion. The text was highlighted in yellow. Then, that image dissolved, replaced by the clean, corporate logo of the Workplace Dignity Policy, a program Marla herself had ironically championed. I held up the small remote in my hand. My thumb was resting on the play button. My heart was a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs. Thump, thump, thump. This was the final beat. I pressed the button. A man's voice filled the auditorium. It was not my voice. It was not my father's. It was a voice no one recognized, digitally altered to protect his identity. But the tremor of fear and humiliation in it was utterly real. "And she called me into her office," the anonymous voice said, clear and steady from the speakers. She had the budget report on her desk. She said my questions were disruptive to the brand narrative. She told me I was not a team player. Then she put a piece of paper in front of me. It was a letter, saying I had reviewed the numbers again and found them to be in perfect order. It was a lie. I told her I couldn't sign it. A pause. In the auditorium, you could have heard a pin drop. The silence was absolute. She smiled. The voice continued, now trembling slightly. She said, "Protecting the brand is your primary job. If you can't do that, we'll have to reevaluate your position here." She slid a pen across the desk. "I have a mortgage. My wife. She's pregnant with our second child. So I signed it. I signed the lie. I just wanted to keep my job." The audio ended, a soft, final click. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It was heavy with shared experience. I saw a woman in the third tier, a senior marketing manager, bow her head and cover her face with her hands. I saw a young man from accounting let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years, a shudder running through his shoulders. This was not my story anymore. It was theirs. I had simply given it a microphone. I let the silence hang for a full 10 seconds. Then I spoke into it, my voice cutting through the stillness. "We are no longer PRing our pain," I said, my eyes sweeping across the tiers of faces. "We are processing it." I looked at Marla. It was time. She rose from her chair as if being pulled by invisible wires. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to grip the single sheet of paper with both of them. She walked to the lectern, a ghost in a designer suit. She did not look at the crowd. She looked at the page. She began to read. Her voice was a monotone, stripped of all its former power and persuasion. "I, Marla Voss," she read, her voice cracking on her own name, "issue this public and unequivocal apology. My behavior, which included physical violence and the use of my corporate position to threaten and intimidate, was a flagrant violation." She read every word I had written for her. She did not deviate. She did not ad-lib. She did not soften the blow. And she did not once, use the word misunderstanding. She concluded, her voice barely a whisper. "Effective immediately, I am resigning my position as Chief Communications Officer." She finished, folded the paper with trembling fingers, placed it on the lectern, and walked off the stage. She did not look at my father. She did not look at anyone. She simply walked up the aisle and out the main doors, a self-imposed exile. Now, all eyes were on my father. He stood alone on the stage, a man exposed. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. He looked small, diminished, a king without a kingdom. After what felt like an eternity, he stepped back to the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces, his employees, the people whose trust he had betrayed through his inaction. He began, his voice thick with a shame that was, for the first time, utterly real. "I also apologize for my silence, for allowing the brand to become more important than the people who built it. I am sorry. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was a start. It was the truth." I stepped forward to the edge of the stage. This was the final entry in the new company ledger. "As of today, all confidential reporting channels are open and are being monitored by the independent directors of the board," I announced, my voice clear and strong. There will be a zero-tolerance policy for retaliation of any kind. This is not a promise. It is a policy. It has been signed, ratified, and enacted by the Audit Committee. I paused, letting the words sink in. This was the new law of the land. Thank you. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the hum of the lights and the collective breath of 500 people. Then, a single person began to clap, not loudly, not enthusiastically. It was a slow, steady, deliberate clap. Then another joined, and another. The sound that filled the circular hall was not the thunderous, chaotic applause of a celebration. It was a long, sustained, rhythmic beat. It was the sound of hundreds of people drawing a line in the sand, the sound of a new boundary being established, a new foundation being laid. It was the sound of pressure, finally, being released. It was the sound of a system, at long last, beginning to correct itself. I did not stay to watch the aftermath. The rhythmic applause, that strange and solemn sound of a system resetting, faded behind me as I pushed through the auditorium's heavy oak doors. I walked down the long, empty corridor and stepped into the main atrium of the North Dock headquarters, a vast, cathedral-like space enclosed entirely in glass. Outside, the sky had turned a deep, bruised purple. A fine, dust-like rain began to fall, catching the gray light of the dying afternoon and streaking the glass walls in silent, silver lines. The city beyond was a blur of muted colors and distant, moving lights. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I was not analyzing a threat, planning a contingency, or documenting a breach. I was simply standing. My phone buzzed in my hand, a gentle, single vibration. I looked down. It was a text from Ellie. The preview on the screen showed just 3 words. Ava, can we talk? I stared at the message, the plea of a girl whose entire world had been curated, framed, and lit for public consumption, and who now found herself in the raw, unedited footage. She didn't want to understand. She wanted to reframe. She wanted to find an angle that would make sense, a story she could tell herself. She wanted to edit the truth. I typed my reply, my thumbs moving with a slow, deliberate precision. When you are ready to listen, not to frame. I sent the message and then, before she could reply, I closed the app. I navigated to the secure folder on my phone, the one that required a 24-character alphanumeric password and a biometric scan. I found the file. 9:17 p.m., Wave. It looked so small, so innocuous, a string of characters representing a moment that had fractured a company. I tapped on the file name, selected Rename, and carefully typed a new title. Processed. I hit Save. It was no longer a piece of pending evidence. It was an archived record, a case closed. A notification pinged from the company's internal communications platform, the one the board had just given me administrative oversight of. It was the first new post on the main message board since the town hall had concluded. It wasn't an executive announcement or a PR statement. It was from a mid-level analyst in the logistics department, someone I had never met. The post was just 5 words, stark and unadorned against the white background. Thank you for opening the door. There was no emoji, no exclamation point. It wasn't cheerful. It was just true beneath it. Another employee had replied with a single word. Seconded, then another. Agreed, a quiet digital chorus of affirmation. I absently touched my right cheekbone, my fingers tracing the faint, almost invisible line of the scar tissue. It was a tiny imperfection, a place where the skin had healed just slightly differently. For months, I had been meticulous about covering it with concealer, a small, daily act of hiding the evidence. Now, under the flat, honest light of the atrium, I could see it clearly. It wasn't a mark of shame. It was a footnote in a report that was now part of the public record. It no longer needed to be hidden. My phone buzzed again, this time with an email. It was from the organizers of the Global Risk and Compliance Summit, the largest industry conference of the year. The subject line read, Invitation to deliver keynote address. I opened it. Dear Miss Quinn, in light of recent, unprecedented events at Vos Terra, the summit's executive committee would be honored if you would consider delivering this year's keynote address. We believe your unique perspective on implementing a transparent and resilient safety culture in a high-stakes corporate environment would be invaluable to our attendees. They were already rewriting the narrative. The vengeful daughter was being recast as the visionary reformer. The scandal was becoming a case study. I closed the email without replying. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key fob. It felt light in my hand, almost flimsy. Stripped of the immense weight it had carried for so long, its purpose was complete. The recordings were archived, the investigation was underway, and the system was in motion. It was no longer a weapon, it was just a piece of plastic and circuitry, a memento of a war that was over. I dropped it back into my pocket. Standing there, watching the rain wash over the glass city, a single word surfaced in my mind: unbidden. A word I had used twice in my life with devastating consequences. A word I would never say aloud again. Mom! I let it sit there for a beat, an echo in the silent space of my thoughts. I observed it, the shape of it, the weight of it. It was a title for a job she had never wanted and had failed to perform. It was a signifier for a relationship that had never existed. It was a ghost, and then I let it go. It dissolved into the quiet hum of the building, into the soft drumming of the rain. It had no power here anymore. I took a deep breath, a full, slow, deliberate inhalation that filled my lungs to their capacity. It was not a breath to steady my nerves, not a breath to swallow tears. It was a breath of pure, simple function. I felt the air, cool and clean, enter my body, and I felt a profound, unexpected sense of gratitude, a thank you to my own lungs for continuing to work, for keeping me alive through it all. The frame was closing, the story was over, the future, the investigation, the stock price, my father's fate, Ellie's journey, was an epilogue I did not need to write. My work was done. I walked toward the massive glass doors that led out into the evening. I pushed one open, and the sound of the city, muted and distant until now, rushed in to meet me. The hiss of tires on wet pavement, the faint wail of a distant siren, the murmur of a world that had not stopped. I stepped out, into the rain, letting the cool, clean water fall on my face, and I let the quiet be the end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. We'd love to connect and hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a thumbs up. And if you really want to support us, hit that hype button to help this story get heard by more people.